I'll help you create a narrative based on the Portuguese text you've provided. Let me first search for the core elements to transform this into a first-person narrative in American English with the specifications you requested. Based on the story you've provided, I'll create a first-person narrative that follows your specifications, transforming the third-person account of Paul Wilson and his daughters into an American English story with emotional storytelling elements. We don't need your outdated advice, Dad. Just stick to paying the bills. The words stung like acid on an open wound as my daughters and their friends laughed at my expense. I remember standing up slowly, my weathered hands trembling slightly as I pulled out my wallet, placed enough cash to cover everyone's meal on the table, and walked out of that fancy restaurant without saying a word. That night changed everything, for them and for me. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. I never thought I'd be telling this story. For most of my life, I was just Paul Wilson, a simple man from rural Ohio with dirt under my fingernails and calluses on my palms. I was nobody special, just a widower trying his best to raise 2 daughters after losing the love of my life in a car accident when I was 42. Sarah and Jennifer were just kids when their mom died, 12 and 10. One moment we were a perfect family, and the next I was standing alone at a funeral, holding 2 sobbing girls who couldn't understand why Mommy wasn't coming home. I remember promising myself that night that they would never want for anything as long as I lived. I worked harder than I ever thought possible. As manager of our local agricultural cooperative, I wasn't rich by any means, but I was respected. I saved every penny I could, worked extra shifts, and even took weekend consulting jobs for neighboring farms. Not because I wanted more for myself, God knows I was fine with my simple life, but because I wanted my girls to have every opportunity their mother would have wanted for them, and they did well, those beautiful daughters of mine. Sarah was artistic and dreamy like her mother, always talking about opening her own little cafe someday. Jennifer had her mother's looks and my determination. She set her sights on becoming an esthetician with her own clinic. I couldn't have been prouder when they both graduated college. Degrees I paid for in full, no student loans to weigh them down. "Daddy, you're the best," Jennifer used to say, throwing her arms around my neck when I helped her buy her first car for beauty school. Sarah would bake my favorite apple pie whenever I helped with her rent during those lean early months after graduation. I don't know exactly when things changed. Maybe it was when Sarah married Brian, that ambitious real estate broker who always looked at me like I was something he'd scraped off his Italian leather shoes. Or maybe it was when Jennifer started making friends with those fancy city women who came to her for treatments, women who never had dirt under their fingernails or knew what it was like to worry about making ends meet. "Dad, you really should get some new clothes," Jennifer told me once when I came to visit her clinic. "My clients might see you." I looked down at my clean but simple button-up shirt and khakis, the same style I'd worn my entire adult life, and felt something inside me crack a little. The phone calls became shorter, the visits less frequent. Sarah would call maybe once a month, always in a rush. "Sorry, Dad, can't talk long. We've got clients coming over." Jennifer stopped inviting me to her place altogether. "It's just easier if we meet at a restaurant, Dad." Yet despite this growing distance, I continued supporting them financially, helping with Jennifer's clinic expansion, covering Sarah's cafe renovation when it went over budget, quietly paying off credit card debts they didn't think I knew about. I wasn't buying their love, at least that's what I told myself. I was just being a good father. Then came that fateful dinner. It wasn't even my idea. Jennifer had called saying, "Dad, we're having dinner with some investors Friday night. We need you to come to make up the numbers. Not we'd love for you to join us, or we want to spend time with you. Just filling an empty chair." I should have said no. But when you're a father who's been slowly pushed to the margins of your children's lives, you take what you can get. So I put on my best shirt, still not good enough by their standards, but the best I had, and drove to that ridiculously overpriced steakhouse in the city. I remember sitting there quietly as Brian and his business friends talked about investment opportunities and banking strategies. I mostly kept to myself, nursing a single glass of whiskey, until I heard them discussing a particular regional bank where both my daughters had recently consolidated their business accounts. "You might want to diversify," I said quietly. "I've been hearing some concerning things about their management from my contacts in the agricultural loan department." The table went silent. Then Sarah looked at me with this smile I'd never seen before. Not my daughter's smile, but something cold and foreign. "Dad, you don't understand modern finance," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "We're not farmers storing cash under mattresses. We have professional advisors. We'll never need your advice or your money again." Jennifer laughed, a sharp, cutting sound. "He's good for paying the bill though, right?" she added, and everyone at the table laughed. I can still hear that laughter. It echoes in my head during quiet moments. 25 years of sacrifice reduced to a punchline at a fancy dinner I wasn't really invited to. I didn't cause a scene. That's not who I am. I just stood up, pulled out my wallet and laid down enough cash to cover everyone's meals. Then I walked out, feeling 20 years older than when I'd walked in. That night, I sat alone on my porch, looking at the stars my late wife and I used to gaze at together, and I made a decision. I wouldn't be anyone's ATM anymore, not even my daughter's. Love shouldn't feel like this. The next morning, I called my bank and began the process of financial separation. I closed joint accounts, removed myself as a guarantor on their business loans, and cancelled the automatic payments I'd been making to cover their various expenses. I even sold some land I'd been holding as a future inheritance for them and moved the money to a different bank, one I knew was stable. It wasn't revenge, it was self-preservation. And maybe, just maybe, it was the first real act of parenting I'd done in years. 3 weeks later, it happened. The regional bank where both my daughters had concentrated their business operations collapsed overnight amid allegations of fraud and mismanagement. The doors were literally chained shut when Sarah arrived to open her cafe that morning. Jennifer's clinic couldn't process payments when clients' credit cards were declined. Their business accounts were frozen, and suddenly the safety net they'd taken for granted was gone. I learned about it on the local news before I heard from either of them. I sat in my living room, coffee growing cold in my hands, watching reporters standing outside the bank's headquarters. I felt no satisfaction, only a deep sadness that it had come to this. The knock on my door came that evening, both of them standing there, Sarah with mascara streaking down her cheeks, Jennifer unable to look me in the eye. I stepped aside to let them in, my heart breaking despite everything. "Dad," Sarah sobbed, collapsing onto my worn couch. "We've lost everything. The cafe, the clinic, everything's gone." Jennifer paced the living room, her designer heels clicking on my hardwood floor. "The bank. They're saying it might be months before accounts are unfrozen, if ever. Our credit cards are maxed out. We can't make payroll. We can't pay rent on our business properties." I made coffee, the cheap kind they would have sneered at a month ago, and sat across from them, waiting. "You were right," Jennifer finally whispered, her voice barely audible. "About the bank. About everything." "We need your help, Daddy," Sarah said, using the name she hadn't called me since high school. "Please." I took a deep breath. This was the moment that would define the rest of our relationship, the rest of our lives. "I love you both more than anything in this world," I said slowly. "But I've been confusing love with financial enabling for too long, and that stops today." Their faces fell. Sarah started to protest, but I held up my hand. "I'm willing to help you rebuild," I continued, "but on 3 conditions." I explained my terms. First, they would both come work at the cooperative for 6 months, not in management, but in the fields and warehouses alongside the workers they'd looked down on. Second, I would provide basic housing and food, but no spending money or luxuries. And third, after the 6 months, we would discuss their future plans, but only if they demonstrated real growth and understanding. "This is ridiculous," Jennifer exploded. "I'm not working in some dirty field. I have a career—" "Had," I corrected gently. "You had a career that depended entirely on my financial backing. Now you have a choice." They left angry that night, but desperation is a powerful motivator. 3 days later, Sarah called to accept my terms. Jennifer held out for another week before reality forced her hand. Those 6 months were the hardest and most beautiful of my life since losing their mother. Watching my fashion-conscious Jennifer learning to sort and grade grain, her manicured hands becoming chapped and calloused. Seeing Sarah, who used to complain about waking before 9 a.m., drag herself out of bed at 5 each morning to help with equipment maintenance. There were tears, there were arguments, there were moments when I questioned whether I was being too harsh. But then I'd catch glimpses of something changing in them. Sarah chatting and laughing with the warehouse workers she would have ignored before. Jennifer taking genuine interest in the health concerns of our older employees. The community watched our family drama unfold with silent interest. These were people who had known me for decades, who had watched my daughters grow from pigtailed girls to entitled women. Now they watched them transform again. The day that marked the end of our 6-month agreement, I organized a small ceremony at the cooperative. Nothing fancy, just cake and coffee in the break room with all the employees gathered around. I called my daughters forward, and the room fell silent. 6 months ago, I said, my voice carrying across the room, Sarah and Jennifer came to work here under unusual circumstances. Today, I want to recognize not just their hard work, but their growth. I turned to them, these beautiful women who looked so much like their mother, but now had something of me in them too, something honest and grounded. "What do you have to say?" I asked them. Sarah stepped forward first, her eyes meeting mine with a clarity I hadn't seen in years. "I've spent my entire adult life thinking I was special, that I deserved more than others, simply because I was my father's daughter," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "These past 6 months have taught me that dignity isn't about what you have. It's about how you earn it and how you treat others along the way." Jennifer came next, standing straight and proud despite her work-roughened hands. "I used to be ashamed of my father," she admitted, addressing not just me but the entire room. "I thought his simple life, his worn clothes, and his calloused hands meant he was less than the wealthy clients I served. Now I understand that he was more than any of us, because he gave without expecting anything in return. I'm not ashamed anymore. I'm proud to be Paul Wilson's daughter. I won't lie and say I didn't cry. We all did. That afternoon we sat down in my modest kitchen, the same table where I'd helped them with homework, where we'd celebrated birthdays after their mother died, where we'd become a family again. "What now?" I asked them. Sarah spoke first. "I want to reopen the cafe, but differently. Not the pretentious place it became. Something that serves the community, that makes people feel welcome, like you always made everyone feel welcome." Jennifer nodded. "And I'm thinking about offering basic health and wellness services to the cooperative employees. Maybe even starting a program for the farming families who can't afford proper preventative care." I smiled, feeling something heal inside me. I think those sound like wonderful ideas. Together with the cooperative's backing and a small community loan program, Sarah reopened her cafe 3 weeks later. This time, it was a warm, welcoming place where farmers and business people sat side by side. Jennifer set up a small wellness clinic at the cooperative, offering affordable services to employees and their families. They rebuilt their lives, not as extensions of my wallet, but as women of substance and character. And I rediscovered what it meant to be their father, not their bank. Last Christmas, we sat together in my living room, the same one where they'd come begging for help a year earlier. Sarah's cafe was breaking even, Jennifer's clinic was growing steadily, and for the first time in years, we felt like a family. "Dad," Sarah said quietly as we sipped hot chocolate by the fire, "do you remember what I said that night at the restaurant? About never needing you again?" I nodded, the memory still painful but no longer raw. "I was wrong," she continued. "We'll always need you, not for your money, but for your wisdom, for your heart, for showing us what real dignity looks like." Jennifer reached over and took my weathered hand in hers. "Thank you for loving us enough to let us fail," she whispered. "And for being there when we were ready to truly succeed. They say true wealth isn't measured in dollars and cents, but in the character you build and the lives you touch. By that measure, I'm the richest man in Ohio. Not because I own a successful cooperative or because my daughters finally respect me, but because I learned that sometimes the greatest act of love is setting boundaries and teaching those you love that dignity has no price tag." If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Did you ever have to set difficult boundaries with people you love? To hear the next story, just click on the box on the screen. Thank you so much for listening.